Hello and welcome to this edition of NYSE Governance Services Inside Compliance. I'm Erica BYRNE with NYSE Governance Services Corpedia, and we've got a great show today. We have with us today in the studio to talk about codes of conduct, Bill Brown from Knights of Columbus. For those of you who are not familiar with the Knights of Columbus, they are a Catholic fraternal insurance benefits organization dedicated to helping families through charitable works and contributions. Prior to working with the Knights of Columbus, Bill served as the AUSA and AAG in Connecticut, where he prosecuted a wide variety of federal and corporate fraud cases. And I should also mention that Bill is a U.S. Marine. Thank you for your service, Bill.
Thank
and
you,
welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Eric. It's great to be here.
I'm very happy you could join us today. So Knights of Columbus was in an interesting situation when you guys made a decision to redo your code of ethics, because obviously you have a tremendous history to pull on.
Yes.
Talk me through the process of how you all decided it was time to redo your code.
Well, when I started at the Knights of Columbus a few years ago, our CEO, Mr. Anderson,
who has, by the way, the best title ever.
Yes, Supreme Knight.
Supreme Knight.
Yep. So he gave the legal and compliance team very clear guidance. Mm-hmm. He said, you know, we want a first-class compliance program, and he said he recognized that the foundation of that is the code of conduct. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, Erica, we have a very rich history. The people who work at the Knights and all of our 1.8 million members are very, very connected to that history. It's very important to us. We were established in 1882 by Father Michael McGivney at St. Mary's Parish in New Haven, which is right around the corner from our Supreme Council. So again, the close connection to that history, we wanted that to permeate our code. Mm-hmm. But we also knew that, with the increasing regulatory scrutiny, we had a lot of legal risk topics that we had to cover, and we wanted the 1,000 or so employees at the Supreme Office to really own it, and we wanted them to be in the process of developing our code from the very beginning. So what we did was we put together a code committee, and we had representatives from just about every key department in the building. Mm-hmm. And we really just started to
Let me go ahead and stop you there, because that's a really interesting place to start with your process. And of course, Mr. Anderson was completely right. The latest piece of regulatory guidance we've seen on codes was the FCPA Resource Guide. And in that, the DOJ and the SEC go so far as to say in Chapter 5 that the Code of Conduct is the cornerstone of your compliance program. So part of the reason we titled this edition of Inside Compliance as the foundation, the Code of Conduct, is because that really is the way we think about it, and it's the way the government clearly thinks about it as well. So let's talk a little bit about who you had on that committee. I don't want to jump over that step, because I think it's an interesting step you all took, and it's a step that many of our audience could learn from in terms of getting that buy-in and that employee understanding that at the end of the day, responsibility for ethics and compliance is everyone's responsibility. It's not just the compliance program. So who was on your committee?
Well, myself, and then I was very closely partnered with our Deputy General Counsel, Beth Elfrey, and she and I worked very closely together to put together the team made up of human resources, communications, internal audit. We have a number of in the life insurance business, we have a number of production units. The people who take care of making all the transactions happen, and those departments tend to be a little bit bigger. They're manpower intensive, so we wanted to have representatives from those departments. Our sales force, we had representatives from that department as well. And the idea was really, again, to make sure that the people who were going to use this document the most had some ownership in it. We got their buy-in, and we really just started to say, what do we want this code to be? We knew what we didn't want it to be. Right. We didn't want it to be full of legalese that was sort of, not forced upon them, but issued from, the legal department. We wanted this to, first of all, come from Mr. Anderson directly, and he would send the message that, this is who we are as a company. Just like the annual statement sort of lays out how we're doing financially and with our membership and so forth. We wanted this document to really demonstrate our commitment to the highest ethical standards and our core values of integrity, professionalism, excellence, and respect. And I think we achieved that with the right people on the code committee.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it sounds to me like one of the things that you all focused on with the code, and it's certainly something that whenever we talk to companies about best practices from a code of conduct perspective, we always emphasize this as well. And it's your code is your opportunity not just to tell them how you want them to behave. Much more importantly, from our perspective, the code is also an opportunity to tell them why they
Right.
need to behave that way.
Right.
So it's not just, here are the things that we expect you to be doing from a job function perspective, and not doing for that matter. It's much more of an opportunity to say, here's why
Right.
these things are so important. It's not just about the how you do it, it's about the why you do it. And things like, we do what we do because of our history. This is who we are as an organization. This is the way we operate as a company. Here's who we're operating on behalf of. So that stakeholder conversation, we keep appropriate financial records because our shareholders expect it of us, and it's something we owe to them.
Right.
We protect our customers' private data and personal information, because that's the bond that we have with our customers. They know they can trust us when they give us their information. And casting these complex legal and regulatory topics in the kernel of the why makes them much more easily understood by the average employee,
Right.
as opposed to just, I'm doing this because the lawyers tell me that I have to, right?
Very true. Very true.
And that's where codes were, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Certainly if we look at the Sarbanes-Oxley codes, the 2002, 2003, the I've got this code because I have to codes, they were, Moses come down from the mountain kind of
Right.
codes. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And if we compare and contrast that to codes now, and codes like the one that you all produced at NYSE, it's a very different way of having what at the end of the day is still a regulatory conversation, but you're having it in a way that helps every employee, regardless of their job function and background, really understand the material that's being presented to them.
Yeah. And we had, the next step in our code process was doing the training.
Mm-hmm.
So we took the opportunity, and we trained every single employee and contractor in the building. It was almost 1,000 people. And we had an excellent team from our Human Resources Training and Development department that led the effort, and myself or Beth would be at each one of these sessions. And it took about 4 months to get everyone trained, but we had the opportunity to tell them that, personally. This is how, all the, millions of dollars that the Knights donates to charity every year, the 70 million plus volunteer hours that we dedicate by our members throughout the world for charitable causes. None of that's possible unless the employees at the Supreme Council are doing things the right way.
Right.
And that means being a good steward of our assets and treating each other the right way. That's how we do our part to make sure that the Knights continues to have the success that we've enjoyed over the last 132 years.
Right. And talk to me a little bit about that audience at the Supreme Council, because one of the things that we always encourage companies to think of when they look at their code of conduct is to really think about who their audience is. Because at the end of the day, your code needs to speak to your employees. It needs to speak to your history. It doesn't need to speak to anybody else's employees or anybody else's history. It's about your code of ethics, your code of conduct. So how did you all go through the process of sort of figuring out what the profile of your audience was, your employee audience?
Right. We decided to focus on the employees and the contractors in the building. And again, this was coming from the very top. We started with the board of directors and senior management. We got their buy-in, and then we actually trained them first. And when we came back to the Supreme Council and started our training in-house, we were able to tell them, look, the hour-long training session that you're about to go through, you're not alone. Every member of the board of directors has been briefed on this product. Your senior managers have received this training. And I can remember looking across the room during one training session and seeing our chief operating officer sitting next to a gentleman from the printing plant. And the feedback that we got from this training was, not only was this not, sort of forced upon them from somewhere on high, they were meeting people that they hadn't met.
Right.
And they were really learning the value of these lessons from every level within our organization.
And then obviously one of the things that you all put some time and energy into with the written code itself is the the values and the history piece of it. And you brought a copy
Yes.
of the code with you.
Yes.
So one of the things I just wanted to point out to the folks in the audience is the way that the Knights actually designed the code, because it's one of the things that's really important, I think, for companies to think about is putting the same level of time and energy into their code of conduct as they do into other marketing materials, because at the end of the day, it really is a communication opportunity with a wide variety of audiences, whether it be your employees or your potential business partners, shareholders, things along those lines. And so clearly you spent some time with your images, you spent some time with your layout. It kind of looks like a shield on the front there.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about the reception that this got as a document within your employee base. What was the feedback you received?
Yeah. Well, obviously, as you recognize, Erica, the presentation is very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
As we've discussed, our old code was, it was solid. It was a good product, but it didn't look like this.
Yeah.
It didn't look like something that an employee would want to carry around with him or her and use as a valuable resource. We have a beautiful annual statement that I mentioned, and we patterned this on that because we wanted everyone to know, if you see our annual statement lying around, that's an important document to this organization. And we wanted that same sense to come from this document.
Absolutely.
So we turned it over to our graphics design team after, we had the Corpedia review and diagnostic, and we came up with this. It works for the Knights of Columbus.
Yeah.
It might not work for
Right.
every organization.
But it doesn't. Again, that's the important thing. It works for you.
This was a good fit for us.
And I also noticed you guys have a tagline, which is great. So that's one of the things we've talked to a lot of companies about lately. Is a lot of companies are really interested in branding their program.
Yes.
And there are a lot of great examples of that kind of activity out there. Your tagline is every day, everywhere, everyone.
Right, and that's sort of the theme that this is for everyone at every level of the organization throughout the order. And the title, Keeping the Promise, is a reference to Father McGivney's promise. When he started the Knights, the promise was to take care of the widows and orphans of our members who became sick or injured on the job. And it was literally started by Father McGivney passing around a hat, everyone throwing in some money, and when that family needed some money, they had some resources there. And our message throughout this training was, we're still doing the same thing today. The fundamental thing that drives us is taking care of our members and their families, and so we wanted that message to come through this document as well.
The hat's a little bigger, though.
The hat is much, the hat's much bigger, much more colorful.
And so when you guys got around to rolling the code out, this is a question that we get from companies that we work with a lot, and that is, what else do I do, right? So I've got this great code, and it's really visually interesting, and my employees want to spend some time with it. As we all know, our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter these days. The last statistic I saw was that the average American's attention span is 12 and a half seconds at this point. So you've grabbed their attention, they're engaged with the document, you use the visual appeal of it to get them sort of pulled into it, they want to see it. What else did you all do in terms of the code rollout? Did you do desk drops or screensavers, or were there sort of other elements of your campaign when you all rolled the code out?
Yes, we started every training session with a video message from Mr. Anderson, and then we did scenario-based training, so we weren't lecturing at everyone. We got everyone talking. Typically the training groups were about 24 people, so we'd have 8 groups of 3. We had 8 scenarios, and it was just allowed everyone to share their thoughts, and so I'd say about 45 minutes of each session was our employees interacting with one another. It wasn't like a lecture type of situation. And then when you completed that training, we called you code certified, and you received your very own core values card, which is suitable for carrying around in your wallet or your purse. And the idea was that this is something that was earned, wasn't just given to you. And I had to remind some of our employees that it's not a gift card, but it still does have value because they earned it.
Right.
And on the back is just some questions they can ask themselves if they're in a situation where they're not sure what to do, kind of like an ethics decision tree, and then points of contact they can call if they ever have a question.
A question or a concern. And unfortunately, we're almost out of time, so we have just time for one more question. And that question is, what's next? Obviously, you've got this great code, you've got the core values card. What are you all thinking about in terms of next steps for this? Is there anything on the horizon that you're all considering?
Yeah, we're just going to keep communicating the message, because this shouldn't be one and done. You have to stay on top of it. We've noticed that there has been a real impact. The number of reports that have come to us, good and bad, and some are just raising concerns. Some people have legitimate questions with gifts, conflicts of interest.
Right.
The lines of communication have really been opened up, at least those are the sort of initial reports. And we want to build on that. We've put this on our intranet site called iLink, and the employees can access it that way as well. So I think our next training session will be a little bit of communication through the intranet and also live training. So we'll just keep sending the message out there and keeping those lines of communication open.
Great. Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure to talk about codes with you. For those of you who are interested in more information on codes of conduct, Corpedia has actually, NYSE Governance Services Corpedia, still getting used to the new name, has done a series of code of conduct webcasts. You can find more information about those on our website. We also, of course, offer a complimentary diagnostic. If any of you are curious about how your company's code of conduct stacks up against best practices like the Knights of Columbus, I encourage you to take advantage of that. You can again find more information on that on our website, and we can benchmark you against our peer database. At this point, we have graded every NYSE listed company's code of conduct, so we can tell you where you stack up against your peers with regard to the code that you currently have in place. And Bill, thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you, Erica.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Inside Compliance. We hope you'll join us next time.